Hello and welcome to the Operation Search and Rescue podcast. I'm your host, Trey Vaught. Today we have a very special guest. I said at the outset of this series that I was looking for a diversity of viewpoints. We've had a young Gen Zer that just got out, young male. We've had someone who isn't a veteran at all, but who talked to us about being institutionalized by prison. We've talked to a woman who has her own fashion line and ministry. We talked to another young woman, also Gen Z, who dealt with some very tough things in the military and was courageous enough to share that with us. And today I'm going to the deeper end of the pool with a gentleman who is well known to me since he is my father. That he might not be very well known to you. I'm going to introduce you today that to increase this diversity that we have going on this subject to give another perspective, maybe from another era, another generation. I think that's needed. I think that wisdom's needed, and also to see the commonalities. You know, the more things change, the more they stay the same in many ways, and that can also be valuable when it comes to learning along this topic. And so, without further ado, I want to introduce you to Buddy Vaught. He was a retired major, Buddy Vaught. He is a Vietnam veteran, a highly decorated one. Although he spent his first 4 years as a Marine, he doesn't talk about that too much. I think he's a lot more proud of the Army as he should be. I can't really hold that against him. But yes, he is. He is highly decorated. He's a Silver Star earner. You know, so I never say winner because you don't win things in the military like it's a Cracker Jack box. These guys do a lot for these medals. So he earned a Silver Star. He's earned 2 Purple Hearts. He has earned a Bronze Star, and he's even earned the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry with a palm, which means, you know, he got that from combat. And in case you're not familiar, which is most of the population, myself included until today, the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry is the equivalent of a Silver Star in our military. So that's nothing to sneeze at whatsoever. And so, and by the way, this is only a few things that he's got, folks. I've seen the whole collection at home, and it's impressive. He had a very full career. He got the chance to do a lot of different things, several different jobs and disciplines, and some of it he can't even really talk about too much on here. And the things he can talk about, though, he can give great insight into. And he's a very good resource. He's a guy who spent 21 years in the service total. And thus far, you know, I've spoken to people who have spent limited time in service. He's my first lifer, as they say. And he is retired. And so he gives a whole other perspective in a lot of ways. So without further ado, I want to thank you, Major Vaught, or Dad, however you'd like to be called for this podcast. I got a feeling you prefer Major Vaught.
No, I'll go with Dad for this one. Thank you, son. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Well, we're absolutely
Oh,
honored. We're honored to have you. Um, so to get things started off, just to illuminate the audience a little bit, let them know sort of where you came from, your background, say before you joined the military, and sort of how you ended up there.
well, where I started off was being a young farm boy. And when I got out of high school in 1959, my dad was talking about how he wanted to grow some more tobacco and more soybeans. And I said, well, I hope you got some help. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, I think I'll join the military, because I don't really enjoy the tobacco fields. He said, oh, well, you'll be fine. I went down to join the Air Force, and they had a 3-month waiting list. I went to join the Army, and they had about a 2-month waiting list. So I walked next door to the Marine recruiters. He said, well, you can leave tomorrow. I said, well, that's me. And
All right, the time was right, huh?
that's how I landed. Well, that's where I ended up. Then after I figured out, what the Marines were going to, I figured the Army was a lot better deal. So after I got out of the Marines, I went back to school for 2 years and then went back in the Army when they got a little bit lonesome.
Okay, so
So,
well, I'm glad you were the one to give them some company. I'm sure they were dying for it. That
yeah, I know they were.
I remember you telling me as I was a young boy. I remember you telling me that the thing that really brought you to the Army from the Marines was it seemed they didn't mind you as getting educated as much as the Marines did. Is that true?
Uh, That is exact. During that time, it was exactly true. Of course, I got to give it to the Marines. They switched over the years a little bit, but back in the early '60s, if you wanted to go to school, if you didn't have no time because it was all their time. And I know I was trying to go to school on Saturday afternoons, and they really didn't look too kindly on it. So
Yeah, I hear that.
yeah,
If they wanted you to have an education, they'd issued you one. That's
that
the Marine Corps view of
that
things.
was that was it all in it was all in fun, but that was what was said.
Okay, and
Yeah,
so I'm wondering, just to draw a contrast here, because I've had some folks on the younger end of the spectrum up to now, and I've asked them the differences they've experienced in being in the military and from their civilian life before they went in, and just sort of the culture shock and things like that. I have a feeling this may be a little different on your end, given that you grew up as a farm boy and you weren't a stranger to a hot sun and and long days and things like that. Can you recall any of any moment or just anything really, generally speaking, that really drew a line, that delineation between the civilian world and the military world, where you knew you were in a different kind of environment?
yes, I can. When the bus pulled into Paris Island, and this big old guy got on and said, "Get your ass off the bus."
That
I said, "Oh, you know,
was a
well, I'm in
wake
for a
up
different
call.
world here."
Yeah,
Yeah, you know,
that will do it. What?
yeah.
How about
But
the daily?
that
I'm sorry. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. Say again.
I was just asking in terms of your daily routine. I understand that basic training, is one thing, but in terms of let's say you're at a basic training now, and just your daily life in the Marines and Army for that matter, just the service life generally. What would you say was the biggest difference between your civilian memories and that?
Uh, well, not a lot. And even though you were controlled in the military, back in the early days, you were also controlled at home. You know, as you well know. But it so there wasn't a lot of difference in the control, but there was a lot of difference in responsibility. I think when you started taking a look at that, it was a difference. At home, I didn't have to worry about anything. I just did what my dad told me. Get out and do whatever. Where in the military, had to start taking. You had to start thinking for yourself. Probably the best way to put it.
And that's probably an answer that a lot of our audience didn't expect to hear, because a lot of civilians, they think military, they think, oh, well, you stop thinking for yourself and you just follow orders. And that's not always the
Uh,
case, especially if you're in a position of leadership. That can't be the case.
exactly.
Yeah. And so
And well, I was lucky.
go ahead.
You No, I said I was lucky in that I made corporal pretty early in the Marine Corps, so I was in a leadership position all the way through there. Even though not as I went on to in the Army, but it was different.
Yeah. And I'd sort of expected this type of answer, because you don't hear that as much. When you're talking to someone, say, not that I'm a spring chicken, but someone around my age, or younger, that, or maybe they only spent a couple years in the military, they'll talk about the rudiments of daily life. Well, you have to eat this time and you get this time to eat and stuff like that. But you never hear any of them say that. Oh well, basically it was just a continuation. Except the guy had a brown round hat on, yelling at me instead of my dad.
Yeah,
But you talk to a lot of the older generation. I've actually talked to guys who, like you, they went through Paris Island, decades ago, and they said, "Hey, man, some of it was a vacation in a way." you know,
well, as far as the physical, it was. It didn't bother me at all because I'd played sports in high school and was raised on the farm where you was going every day, so the physical part was nothing. It laughed about it doing
yeah.
it.
So tell the truth. Did you ever make fun of any of the guys that maybe were from up north, or that maybe didn't have the physical background that you did, playing football and being a farm boy and
Oh,
all
every day.
that?
I mean, that was that was that was. you know, I really hate to go ahead and tell you about some of these guys because they may be even listen. They'd still come back, but yeah, that happened.
Yeah, I can bet
Yeah.
so. I can bet so. All right, so moving on now. As I said, you're a Vietnam vet, and would
Yes.
would you say that would you say it's fair to say that your military service could be divided in to pre-Vietnam and post-Vietnam?
Yes. Very, very easy.
So,
Uh,
and that's because your
you
mindset
know,
changed a good bit after deploying. Is that correct?
well, it did, Trey, but let me go back and explain that just a little bit. In combat, if you're in the field, and I'm talking about normally from captain on down that stays out in the field, you develop such a relationship with the people you're out there with that it's one that never goes away. And those people that you're there with, that you depend upon every day, to help save your life and you to help save theirs, it's just something that you just it makes a difference from then on.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of difference.
And it's not something that you just find readily out in the civilian world. That kind of camaraderie.
No, uh, no, even yeah, as you know, in our family we have a lot of law enforcement, and they have a hard job to do, but it's not like sleeping in the field, in a rice paddy or in a jungle with them every night.
Yeah.
For a year you do this, and when you're asleep, you're depending on somebody to watch for you.
Yeah.
So it makes a difference.
Yeah, those
Uh,
fire guard shift, you learn why they push those so hard.
I'm telling you, it without a doubt, it's true.
Absolutely. So
Um,
so as a man who not only you spent 21 years but you also have a decent bit of combat experience and a lot of the medals to show for it. Um, let's go to before you even got out, because in a lot of these interviews I talk about, I say, okay, well, you did these few years, and now let's talk about when you got out. But I think in this interview is very unique because there are different eras in your life. There are different periods in your life that are of consequence to this conversation. And I think it would do an injustice to the audience if we were just to jump straight from Vietnam to you retiring, 15 years later, whatever it was. Um, so let's talk about the time when you're coming back to America from Vietnam. Because remember, this podcast is a lot about living in one type of world and then assimilating to another one. And although you were still a soldier by every metric, by every means, uh, you were leaving one world and coming back to another. Now, they even call about that. They even say when we rotate back to the world, because that's sort of how it seemed. And so, if you will, just educate the audience a little bit on the major changes. What was the first thing that you could remember about coming back from Vietnam? And I'm not talking about R&R or anything like that. I'm talking about when you redeployed to the States, a major difference that you had to acclimate
I I think probably was spit shining. Excuse me,
to.
spit shining boots again. When I came back from when I come back from Vietnam, I was assigned to Fort Jackson as a basic training company commander, which is not what really one wants to do, but it's still a good job, But I was lucky enough to only stay there for a little while before I went to the advanced course, so it wasn't that bad. But I think the biggest thing was it. eh, Well, let me go back this way. The first day I was in Vietnam, the first day I got to my company, I got there at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm sitting there waiting on the company commander to talk with me. And he says, "Hey, if you want a drink, there's some over in the cooler." And I assumed he was talking about a Coke or a Pepsi or whatever. When I opened the cooler, there was nothing but Budweiser in it. And so he said, "Oh, and hand me one too." So I handed him a Budweiser and I opened my Budweiser, at 5 o'clock in the morning. And we drank not a lot, but there was no certain time when the club opened. And then when you got back to the States where everything was sort of halfway run on a schedule, it was a heck of a difference, So it took a little while to get used to coming back to that way.
Yeah,
But
I know a lot of soldiers, and that's one thing they love deployment because they did feel that they were freer out there to sort of, as long as you did your job, you pretty much got left alone, you know, and they love that.
true.
And then
Yep.
they got back to garrison and they got back to the States, and that's when you got this inspection and that inspection, and here we go with this, and all the little minor details of the Army that drive you crazy, they come back into play. And so, yeah, I hear that a
Well,
lot.
let me throw in something that what you're saying is correct, and the, the the commanders that had been in Vietnam understood that a lot. It was the young people that was commanding that had never been in combat that is where we got a lot of Article 15s and a lot of court martials, if you want to know the truth.
Yeah.
That from a guy that meant nothing in the world other than he just got to understand why he couldn't do something, at 9 o'clock in the morning. So yeah, it was. It took a little while to get used to.
And running along this same vein, in regards to coming back from Vietnam, now infamously, a lot of soldiers were not welcomed with open arms, and there was a certain segment of the American population, and unfortunately, this segment still exists, where they really have no moral boundary about they can't separate their opinions on a war from the soldiers fighting them, and they literally they take it out on the war fighter. You have some people like that, where there's spitting or there's name calling and some of the most heinous things you can think of. We know a lot of that happened. And so I wanted to ask you if you have personal experience coming back from that war and sort of dealing with a not so warm reception.
Yes, and in fact, that makes a good story. On my way back, my seatmate was a chaplain, and we flew together from Saigon into San Francisco. When we got off the plane, back in those days, you had to go out the terminal, walk to the other terminal. And when we walked outside, there was probably 1,000 flare children out there on the sidewalk chanting. And in my hand, I had a sword in one hand that my platoon had given me. Then I had a Chicom rifle in the other hand. So the good chaplain, he said, Dewey, what you gonna do with that rifle when those flare children? I said, well, I'm probably gonna stick it up his butt or her or whatever. And we walked about 20, 30 foot. And he said, well, let's get off the sidewalk and walk around. I said, no, I'm going to walk down the sidewalk. He said, well, if you're going to do that, how about let me carry that rifle or the sword one for you? I said, okay. So I handed him the sword. Me and him walked down the sidewalk. It parted. We had no problems whatsoever.
Moses in
If
the
they
Red
said
Sea.
anything, it was well. If they said anything, we couldn't hear it because we walked down the sidewalk, got to our terminal.
Yeah, they might have decided that
But
y'all
there
were
was a lot of.
Romans.
Well, I'm sure they seen the chaplain that he would pray for him, so I'm sure that's had a lot to do with it. And
Oh boy,
but it was there was some that had some real bad experiences though. I just never, thank goodness, I never had no one spit on me because that would have been trouble. Me or them one, but it didn't happen, and and
yeah.
I still don't understand why they do that.
Well, I think it goes back to what you were talking about a while ago, and for the same reason that the military wasn't as hard to adjust to for you as a young man. It's because you were raised, and the reason they're that way is because the way they were raised. Unfortunately,
Well, yeah,
maybe not all of them.
I
Maybe
agree.
some fell into some
I agree.
things and got their head back on straight later. But for the most part, I mean, if
Yeah,
I feel like
yeah,
if you'll do something that heinous, then usually you haven't had any kind of training. That's worth
yeah,
the
I
damn.
agree.
It's
Yep.
it reminds me of another quote you gave me when I was young, and you said this gentleman had dropped off his son at your basic training, company and said,
Oh yeah, yeah,
make a man out of him and said, look, you can't do it in 18 years. I don't think I'm going to do it in 10 weeks. But,
yeah.
that's,
Well, it's true. I mean, you're gonna help them, but you can't do something in 8 to 10 weeks what someone hasn't done in 18 years.
yeah,
You know.
no, you just can't. You just can't. And so,
Um,
beyond those bad apples, and by the way, I don't want to paint every flower child, as it were, as someone who would do that. Some of the hippies were, harmless, just doing their thing and just
yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
I'm not saying they all spit on soldiers or anything like that, but it did happen, and
yeah.
something that we need to
It
reckon with.
it did.
And so,
Yep.
yeah, we're all about truth here. So, we're going to bring the truth. And so, beyond that, getting back to your unit, um, did you notice any change in yourself in terms of how you just conducted yourself on a daily basis, or maybe how you handled things? Or were there times of less patience? Did you gain patience? Did you did, just in general, did your temperament change from the war, from to when you got back?
Yes. Uh, uh, I found the hardest thing to adjustment I had to make was by being patient. Sometime, in in combat, you don't have the time to think a lot of times, so you make a decision and you go. And when I got back, I found out that you better take time to make, to come up with a decision rather than just saying, let's go, doing it. You want to make the right decision in combat. And, if you don't, you'll know about it in a hurry. But it's still decisions made in a split moment as opposed to back in garrison in a conventional system.
Yeah, and
Is that
so go ahead.
sort of what you're looking for?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good answer. Thank you. So I'm wondering, did that sort of stay with you? Those changes that you just discussed, did they stay with you, or they sort of milder over time, or how would you say?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, the not making things in a split second probably has stayed with me a long time, to today. Even though I'm still accused of doing it too much, but yeah, the taking my time to look at something is definitely stayed with me.
Okay, yes,
Of
that's
course, not.
good.
But again, I got to go back even in combat. You know, you better know what the situation is before you make a decision. So there's a lot there to it. But when you make a decision, I think what I'm trying to say is when you make a decision in combat, you want the people to do it right then, and it's a little bit different back in garrison where they don't jump time you say it. A little bit of difference there.
Yeah, I would say
If
so.
that makes yeah. So hopefully that makes sense.
Oh yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and it's sort of
Mhm.
reminiscent of the point I made with Diana James. I think it was a couple of weeks ago when we were explaining that taking orders in the military, you do it unthinkingly, but not because you're not a thinking person. It's because of the nature of the job. It's You're not working at a Home Depot, as like I say. Say if your manager
Uh,
comes up and says, "Hey, get that thing off that top shelf up there," and you look up at it and say, "I'm going to need a really tall ladder, or I'm going to kill myself." I don't think that's a great idea, there, manager. Well, it doesn't work that
you
way in the
know,
army, because if you stop to look at every order you're given and to
mhm.
assess, the danger of it, the army's not going to. It can't operate that way, not in a war zone.
I agree wholeheartedly. I
And
agree.
and so, yeah, I mean, there are reasons for that, and it has its drawbacks in the
Hmm.
civilian world, but
Right.
in the army
Right.
world, they're not too concerned with how you deal with it in the civilian world. They're worried about right here and now and bringing guys home alive. So it's completely
Correct.
understandable.
Correct.
It's
Yep.
completely understandable. Okay, so now we're finally there. We're finally getting to your retirement. So I know you spent some time in Germany, and you've been in a lot of places, but we don't have time to cover every place you've been and then all those good
Hmm.
stuff. We want to get to the meat and potatoes
Hmm.
here to the stuff that people need to hear. So we're going to fast forward a little bit to your retirement. 21 years after that farm boy ran out of the tobacco field and said enough of this, you said enough of the army, and so you were coming back and you were going to be a civilian and try your luck there. You already had a full career in, and so you're looking ahead. I'd been born just a year prior. I was born right before my dad retired. In case anybody was wondering if I was an Army brat, and I was a brat, but just not an Army one. Just a retired Army one, I guess. But we want to talk about any pitfalls you might have faced, and when I say that, I'm not talking about were you in this deep dark hole that you couldn't see the light out of, or any of that dramatic stuff. Maybe that narrative doesn't fit your story very well. However, through the study that's been done, it's very evident that every soldier, sailor, marine, wherever they are, they spend a career in the military, then they go into the civilian world. There is an adjustment, and how you deal with this adjustment determines where you're going to end up. And by that I mean you could end up on the street, or you could end up successful. And I just want to put it bluntly, okay? And I completely
Yeah.
empathize with, and please don't misunderstand me, your audience. If you see a veteran, a homeless veteran, I'm not saying that guy he was weak and he couldn't handle the adjustment. It's a lot more complicated than that. There's some damn strong men that are sleeping under overpasses tonight that for mental reasons that we're still trying to get our arms around. And that's one thing this podcast is for. That's why we started it. We're trying to get our arms around this thing, this whole idea of assimilation, acclimation, and everything else. And so being a guy that spent 21 years in and saw combat and has been all over the world and seen a lot and done a lot and experienced a lot, what would you say was the biggest adjustment that you had to make going into the civilian world from a career in service?
Not having the companionship that you had in the military, or the relationships you had. You know, in the military, especially the lifers, as they call us, they you get to talk to those guys every day, and being everyone knows what everybody makes, they know what to do for a living. There's really no secrets between them. When you get out in civilian life, is when you come out. You know, you don't know what's out there, and it takes a little while to acclimatize to it and get used to dealing with them. So it's a heck of an adjustment, even though you're coming out and going. So I think that's the biggest thing. The companionship or the relationships that you have developed in the military, I think, is the biggest thing.
Yeah, and that's been a common theme. I've noticed through this series has been, like I said, as one guest, Alex Munoz, put it. He's not even a veteran, but he said, find your tribe, find your people, your community, and connect with them, and that's really important.
Yeah.
And we're gonna get back to that in just a second. But I wanted to ask one specific question. If you can remember any time,
Okay.
can you remember any time in in that time when you had just gotten back into the civilian world, when you hadn't really gotten well ensconced or comfortable yet? Uh, was there anyone who presented any kind of issue that you would have handled a certain way were you still an officer in the army, but you couldn't because you were a civilian?
Not really, but I'm sure I just can't remember any right now.
Yeah,
I think the one thing is, number one, I took about 8 months off where I didn't look for a job. I didn't try to find a job. I worked in my garden and worked on the lawn, was what I did for about 8 months. And but as a retiree, I could afford to do it because we were going to live, we were going to eat, we were going to drive a car, we had food to eat,
yeah,
and the light bill was paid. And which makes a lot of difference in someone getting out and don't have that luxury of having the money coming in. So I really can't think of that where I would have handled any difference.
So
You
maybe
know, I
maybe one instance would be someone saying, "Hey, come work over here," and maybe you had the flexibility where if you didn't really care for it, you could say no. Maybe that could be
yo, yeah, that is. Let me tell you that there was two things. Number one, you had that flexibility that you didn't have to take the jobs, and number two is that some of the people wouldn't hire a retiree anyway. You know, because the the boss, especially one that was a college graduate, you know, some of the jobs I went out and applied for when I went back to look for a job, they wouldn't hire me because the boss was a high school graduate and he was scared I'd take his job. You know, and it was just sort of funny, you know, but to me it was funny because I was just going to do something a little bit, you know,
yeah.
and
Well, you think
uh,
you think if someone attains that position without a college degree, they'd have a little bit more confidence in themselves. But that's
you would think so, yeah, you would think so, but
that's not
it,
always how it works.
well, I won't, yeah, I know, but yeah, well, I'm telling you, people are funny sometimes,
Yeah, they
you know,
are. They are all the time. I think anymore.
yeah, yeah,
but
I agree.
and now we're gonna bring this full circle now. So and I'm gonna tell the audience, okay, that my dad, when I was growing up, when I was a young tyke, a little tyke, he loved to drink a beer. He loved to smoke a cigarette, and I was usually the gopher for both of them, which is fine. And if someone would have told me, you know, 15, 20 years ago, whenever it was, they said, your dad in a few years is going to stop smoking. He's rarely ever going to drink. He's going to go to church. He's going to do this and that. And I'll be honest, I would have just laughed in their face. I was like, well, you don't know Buddy Vaught. I'm sorry, but that none of that stuff's happening. He's a good man. Don't get me wrong. He's always been a good man. He's always been a good dad, and everything. And I've no complaints. I'm very blessed in that way. But I just I never in a million years thought I'd see that stuff happening. And I'm not. I'm not attributing your quitting all that stuff to what we're talking about now, because I actually know a lot of the reason is, I know you deal with ailments, physical ailments from the army, and there's
Mhm.
certain medications you have to take, and uh, you
Right.
know, I'm not going into your personal medical business and all this, but
Yeah.
I will tell the audience that to this day he walks around with shrapnel in his body. He cannot get through an airport metal detector because he literally has metal in him. And yeah, and it's no joke. And he's gone through over and over. My nieces have cried, to TSA agents saying, "Why won't you leave my granddaddy alone?" And and all this stuff. And so, but so there's a lot there. And look, my dad he's a human. He's an exceptional human, but he's a human. And a lot of things get pushed down. And I'm not here to sit there and bring out every bad memory or everything that maybe he thinks about that this day or every Memorial Day or whatever it is. It's not that kind of podcast, but I am here to look into stuff that does a soldier good. And what I mean by that is when I see something happening and I see changes take place, I'm interested in that. When I see positive transformations, okay, and my dad hasn't transformed completely as a human being, but he has gotten better in a lot of ways, in a lot of ways. And I correlate this with these reunions that started happening. I remember it wasn't long, I think, after I joined when you became aware of they were having these reunions of his old unit from Vietnam. And they were having a lot of them up in Missouri and like the St. Louis. I think they're having a couple different places. I attended a couple of them with them. They're really great experiences. A really good time to talk to some veterans. I wish I could go back now so I could get a bunch more guests on my podcast. So I'm sure I could find a lot. But there was no if you know my dad, there's no denying that these things have helped him out a great deal. And I cannot explain it to you better than he can. However, and so I want to give you a chance now, Dad, to explain. Since you've been going to these reunions of your unit from Vietnam, what positive effects have they had on your life, and why do you think that is?
Well, it's definitely been positive, and I think it's because I went back and reconnected with these folks that we talked about earlier. That relationship that you make when you're sleeping in a rice paddy with somebody every night. I mean, it's something you just can't explain unless you've done it. And to be able to go back and talk with them and talk about where we was at, and then they remember something you don't remember. So it even though it brought back a lot of memories, it gives you that healing power. That, yep, we did it, we made it, here we are, and let's go again. And so I think that's the biggest thing, that just the fact that you can sit down with them guys, and when you talk about Ben Fook or Tan An or Dong Tam, they know exactly what you're talking about. And we talk about, yeah, we went down Thunder Road. Yep, you know, we sure did. So the relationships, I think, is the biggest healing power there is, and it's definitely a positive effect.
Yeah, have you seen this kind of positive effect in other soldiers, other retirees, since you've been going?
No, but I've seen it, and well, not only in retirees, but even the 2 year draftees that go out there now. You can tell it. And yeah, let me go back to the draftees. They had a hard time, and I think in any time, even now, and I think so, because you come out of civilian life for 2 years, you go in the military, and in 2 years you're back out in civilian life again. So you got a lot of it. You got to unlearn a lot of what you learned before. But I'm telling you, and I know this from the time I got out the Marines, so I went to the Army, is that I miss that companionship every morning. I miss going down to the gym, working out with these guys. And also, I was on the boxing team in the Marine Corps, so I worked with them guys, and you just miss all these people. And the relationships was more valuable than anything else. And the rank doesn't make any difference. As you well know, the guys out that we go to in St. Louis, they go from E1 up through Major General, and it's all the same.
Yes,
You can go. So
now,
yeah, go ahead.
I did notice that a couple of them still called you sir, and they're about the same age. I think a couple even saluted. I was impressed.
Yeah, yeah. Well, listen, rank is never mentioned among people that way,
Yeah.
but everybody knows. You don't have to tell them. They and if they didn't, I wouldn't care. I mean, I've been retired 41 years now, so it's sort of
Well, I can tell you,
got out my system a little bit.
since I started this podcast series, I've been active sort of in the VFWs in the area here, and I can tell you that rank definitely still means something to a VFW commander, because they'll have their meetings and they'll start out and those guys are calling him sir and commander and other stuff. I was like, wow,
Yeah, yeah,
and
I know.
and I haven't seen one stop to correct them yet, so I think they like it all right. But that's
They do.
probably why they're in that position. I would imagine they were probably gunning for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So I want the audience to take note here that so we have a guest who's off the beaten path in terms of generation and experience and everything else. And still, the main lesson he wants to put forth is those relationships, that community. Stay in touch with your community, no matter what community that is. I was an Intel guy. Okay, I got my old buddies, that I talk to, and I can tell you it's much of the same in the same way that my father speaks of Ben Fook and so forth, and talking about how those guys in St. Louis know exactly what he means. I can attest that is very powerful. That I can speak to some guys that I served with and use certain terminology or acronyms or whatever it is that most people on the street would look at me like I had nine heads. They know what I mean right away. And there's also a way of speaking without speaking. Well, I'll put it to you this way: there's a way of conveying messages to one another where you know what the other is talking about. Whereas, say, if you're in an elevator with another random person, they'll have no earthly clue what you're talking about, but you'll understand each other. And I'm sure that's not limited to just your intel wingies. That's your combat guys and everybody else. It's just there's a language, and there's a power to being understood, and communication is powerful, period. And so that world that we speak of, that we have to acclimate ourselves out of and stuff, it's still important. Just because we want to get you acclimated to the civilian world doesn't mean we want you to forget about the Army one, because frankly, the remembering the Army one and staying in touch with it is often the key to surviving the civilian one. And so that's a very important message, and one that I'm personally going to end on. However, I don't want my wisdom, for lack of a better term, to be the last bit that you hear on here, because frankly, there's someone much wiser than I on this podcast. And so, Dad, I want to just leave you however long you need, really. If there's any piece of advice you can give to a transitioning soldier right now, meaning or sailor or Marine or airman that's coming out, whether it's 20 years or 4 years or whatever it is, what piece of advice would you give them for succeeding in the civilian world?
Talking to someone that understands you, just what we just got through talking about, with staying in your lane or staying in your community, staying in your tribe. When you get out and you're lost because no one understands what you're going through or what you're feeling or how you're going, it is where I think most of the people really gets in the bad lane. So seek out, find somebody that can understand you, that knows what you're talking about. And I think it'll help more than anything else.
Absolutely, I think that's great advice. It comes from a great American. Man, I'm proud to call my father, and I hope that you have all benefited from this as much as I have. And I'm looking forward to getting more diverse viewpoints as we go along. I'm not going to play spoiler here and tell you who that might be, but we're going to bring it full circle and get some more really great wisdom for some great people. And so, Major Vaught, I want to thank you for joining us today and offering your wealth of wisdom for this particular topic. And I hope that everyone has been enlightened by it as I have. Thank you, sir.
Hey, thank you, Trey. And we look forward to seeing you in a little while.
All right, I will see you soon. Absolutely. All right, Operation Search and Rescue listeners, we will be back next week, same bat time, same pat channel. Tune in to us. We got a few more to go, and I appreciate all the shares. I appreciate all the support. Appreciate all the love being shown my way. I hope I'm doing a good job for you, and most importantly, I hope we're reaching the people that need to hear us. So until next time, take care, and we love you. Share the light.